Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point podcast. I'm Rachael Lyon, here with my co-host, John Knepher. Hi, John.
Happy New Year, Rachael.
I know, right? Happy New Year. I can't believe it's here. And you know what? I have to say, I'm really excited for today's conversation because we've never dug into this topic, if you can imagine. And in my many, many years here, we've never really dug into hospitality. So I'm super excited for what we're going to cover today, and also, you know, a real world incident and kind of talking through that. And it feels very I can't wait. I feel like it's a movie about to unfold. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest today. Jasson Casey is Chief Executive Officer and one of the founders of Beyond Identity, where he steers efforts to eliminate passwords and build a secure chain of trust. He previously served as the company's Chief Technology Officer, bringing hands-on engineering leadership to scale secure identity platforms. He also balances industry leadership with policy and security scholarship as a visiting fellow at the National Security Institute, GMU Antonin Scalia Law School, and a CSIS Advanced Cyber Studies Fellow. Please also welcome Josh Johansen. He is the Director of IT at Brandt Hospitality Group, where he leads technology strategy and support for a portfolio of hotels operating across the U.S. He focuses on secure, low-friction systems that keep teams productive and guest service running smoothly. Thanks for joining us today, Jasson and Josh.
Thanks for having
us.
Thanks for having us.
So, Josh, I want to kick this right off with digging right into the meat of this, right? So, I think we're here to talk a bit about a cyber attack that you uncovered. I'm hoping you can maybe start telling us by what was your initial impressions, what was detected that you knew something was going on, and how did it unfold?
Yeah, I think in hospitality, the people that we hire to run our hotels and to take care of our guests and to sell our product, we're looking for those folks that can really build relationship and are warm, accommodating, pretty much everything that a cyber attacker would love to see in a person. They want to make things as easy as possible. And when it comes to the way we sell our hotels, oftentimes we work with travel agents or travel brokers, and there's sometimes commission payments that are paid back for groups and things like that. So it's not unlikely for us to get invoices from lots of different agencies, and there's various mechanisms that we use to kind of balance that out and make those payments. However, once in a while, systems fail, something slips through the cracks, and a manual invoice has to be sent out. Unfortunately, that's also a huge vector of attack for us when it comes to phishing campaigns. Folks will send out, they look just remarkably good, invoice notices, and then they attach them behind a wall where you need to log in to view it. They claim it's in OneDrive or use your Microsoft credentials. And we had recently rolled out Beyond Identity primarily to fight this, because we do phishing training, and we do all of this quarterly and annual tests and training to be PCI compliant. However, we know that our folks are just trying to get the job done, and they're trying to make sure that our vendors are paid and our guests are taken care of. And so when they're faced with something like that, they feel a little bit panicked because they need to get this paid. And the GM had reached out to me and they said, "Hey, I need to get into this invoice because I need to pay whatever the travel agency it is for this this invoice, but I need my password to log into it." And I said, "Well, you don't have a password anymore." And she said, "Well, no, I put in my email and it's popped up. I have the Microsoft login screen and it says password." I'm like, that's a phishing attempt. You can just delete it and ignore it. If it was valid, Beyond Identity would have kicked in and allowed you to view it, but you can just back out and just delete it." And she was really sure that it was, so she forwarded it over to me so I could take a look at it. And sure enough, it was a phishing email. They're very prevalent. We have lots of systems to try and stop them, but now the thing that we've noticed in the past few years is they're no longer trying to obfuscate their email address or try to spoof it. And so spoof protection doesn't work anymore. And they'll blatantly just spell out whatever email address it was. And so that lets people think oh, well, it made it through everything, so it must be good. But having Beyond Identity in place with that device-bound passkey is really the thing that stopped that phishing attempt or that harvest credential attack. And I wish I could say that that's the only time that happens, but the reality is we're getting more and more of those calls. When the first time it happened, I'm like, wow, I really made the right decision by engaging Beyond Identity. This is really cool that it stopped it. But now I'm like, wow, it continues to bring value because I get this call probably quarterly about somebody who needs to get into something, and it's asking for a password, and they haven't equated that connection yet.
So with AI today, this impersonation, right, and it's really compelling. And I'd be interested in, are you seeing more upticks in, hey, it's the CEO, or are you guys getting, audio messages, or are there other kind of AI driven risks that you're seeing becoming more prevalent today?
That's interesting. No, we haven't seen that firsthand, but that's something that I am concerned about. I know that we often get people get the text messages that they say they're from our CEO, and he
Mm-hmm.
needs
Yeah.
them to quickly go on out and buy these Apple gift cards because that's how we
Right.
that's what you need to do as a CEO.
Exactly.
Uh, and we warn people about those, but I am concerned that we will see more of an AI driven type of thing where they'll, maybe get like a video call or things like that. I know that's more prevalent for us when it comes to like our banking side, and so there's more
Mm.
um, controls in place that we rely on the banks for. But for our organization, that AI impersonation hasn't become a full level attack yet. But I'm sure that a lot of these phishing emails that we get, because they're getting better and better and better, are probably
Yes.
generated by AI tools to make them look like an Amex, a GBTA invoice or whatever it might be.
I can add a little bit there. Across partners and customers, we actually are seeing an uptick in the AI-enabled adversary,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a couple different ways, right? So, like on the sophisticated route through our partners of name tag, right? We've seen adversaries using AI to essentially generate images of government documents to pass ID verification. Maybe more in the mid-range, we've seen a lot of voice cloning for phishing and essentially the forward of voice notes for escalation of credibility, that sort of thing. In fact, we even did this ourselves. So for our holiday party, we couldn't have all of our executives together just because of travel and logistics and whatnot. And I had been meaning to do some of my so one of my own projects is I want to build a Claude plugin red kit for our security team to make sure that we're always kind of using, testing, and generating the most advanced AI tools. And I had been meaning to take a look into the voice cloning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of a day, I basically got Claude to write a Christmas rhyme in the style of The Night Before Christmas that incorporated kind of the accomplishments of the company over the last 12 months. Relegate a section to each of our executives. And then I built a voice cloning pipeline where I basically pulled and processed audio clips for all of the execs. Some of them I pulled off of Zoom, some of them I pulled off YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and and then built a mechanism that basically took the script and used the clone for each person for each try, and then kind of fused it together into
Mm-hmm.
a simultaneous audio file, and then we ended up playing that later on that night. Um, the couple things that were eye-opening on this, right? This is, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily call it red team-esque as opposed to this was just like a little bit of research. Number one, it was less than a day's worth of work. Number two, what I didn't quite appreciate from an adversarial perspective is when you're doing at least voice cloning, there's two approaches. There's what's called zero shot or multi-shot voice cloning, where you take an off-the-shelf voice model, and by the way, there's a ton of them available in open source, and these aren't massive models, these are small models that run on your laptop, and you give it essentially 10 seconds of audio of the target or the victim, and then you give it the text, and it will generate an audio file, high quality, in the cadence of your person. And I would say this matched my execs. 7 out of 8 of them were like no one would have questioned it, right? One of them was weird,
Yeah.
but I think that was an artifact in the text because some of the text was all caps, so he started screaming, which is
That's
fascinating.
funny.
And so this was all accomplished in a day. Most of the tooling that I built out was really an audio pre-processing, like getting the highest quality
Right.
10-second clip to then feed into the cloner.
Right.
I did all of this with basically zero knowledge before the day, right, in the area. And if I wanted to, I could have done something called fine-tuned the model, right? And when you fine-tune the model, basically you're letting the weights move, and you're essentially training on the victim's voice. This probably would have taken me an extra 2 days to do. But yeah, I'm speculating. I don't actually know. I'm willing to bet I would have closed the gap on that last person and made them realistic as well. So like the point in all of this is these tools are life-changing in how we do work.
Yes.
And let's not forget that the bad guys have jobs too.
Right.
And it's going to change how they come after us. They're going to be able to impersonate us, not just in how they write things, but in what documents look like, in imagery and in voice. And we are seeing an uptick in this. I think it's more in targeted attacks right now than kind of the dandelion style attacks where you mass mail 50,000 people and see who phones home. But yeah, make no mistake, the world is changing very quickly in this regard.
So this whole voice cloning thing is, I mean, it's scary. Like I've received some of these attacks myself from folks impersonating people I know, and it's really hard to tell. Just when you're on the other end of a cell phone. So what kinds of things do people need to do to protect themselves? Like what are the strategies now that these attacks are getting so good?
So let's think about this, right? There's two things. So the most obvious thing that I think everyone kind of jumps to start with is, how do I know that this is fake, right? How do I know if this is real? And it's a reasonable question, but like the next step is a bunch of people then jump to the solution, and it's essentially like fake detection, right? Fake detectors. And I think we've had about 1.5 years of companies producing the equivalent of deepfake detectors, and I kind of have a problem with that for twofold. From a technology perspective, the deception detection in that regard tends to overly focus on essentially what are signal processing artifacts. And if you look at how these models work and how these models are improving and over what time, it's really easy to imagine, or it's hard not to imagine, if we want to double negate it, that the models are going to be, the output of the models are going to be imperceivable from reality. So like is this really even going to work, right? But then ignore the technology question and just think about it as a user behavior. If all of this is there, right, and you're sick, but you want to be on a call, why wouldn't you voice clone yourself?
Right.
You got kicked. Look. We know you love your horses. We know they're really dangerous. You got kicked in the face over the weekend, and so your jaw's barely hanging on. But you still need to be on that call, and you probably don't want to let everyone say they told you so. So you're gonna video clone your jaw back into place, right? Now, obviously, the more realistic example is like makeup filters and blemish filters and enhanced lighting and whatnot. But like, what's the difference? Right? Like if AI is really around the corner, you can't take the position that only bad people use AI. Everyone's going to be using AI. So the detection or the presence of AI is not a meaningful question to even ask.
Right.
A meaningful question to ask is, who is this coming from? On what device is it coming from? What's the level of trust and belief that I have there? And so I would posit that, like, whether it's with a company like ours or someone else, the solution is attestation, right? So video products, audio products, communication and productivity products need to actually start attesting to the author's identity, the device's identity they worked on, and that sort of thing. And we have plugins for Zoom and Teams and Outlook that kind of do this in our product. But like if let's say we go beyond identity, I do think that's the way of the future, right? Like if all sensor data can be faked, then ultimately we need to be able to track data provenance back to the sensor that produced it or the source that produced it. And so this concept of leveraging things like TPMs and hardware enclaves to do this attestation at a high level, like what we do with identity, I think it's here to stay. And I think it's actually going to go up the food chain. And I think it's going to go so far as the sensors that produce data or the humans and machines that produce the data are going to have to essentially watermark it, right? In this way that that you can actually attribute back to hardware. And just to stave off hey, watermarking, I can always strip something off of watermarking. Yeah, that's true, but let's remember what the problem is. The problem isn't can someone strip something out. The problem is can they attach it, right? And they can't just insert the watermark if the watermark is based on a hardware root of trust.
So you also mentioned like the faking of legal documents, right? And we've seen too. There's a lot of push now for authentication via all sorts of things to get access to various things on the internet, and the privacy concerns around that. Like, how do you reconcile what you're talking about to have strong authentication and attestation, but yet protect privacy elements of people in their lives?
Yeah, no, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like let's talk about Tor, right? Tor is it can be the boogeyman of certain conversations, right? Tor is just used for the nefarious. But all right, well, let's remind ourselves who funded the original development of Tor. It was the United States Navy. And the State Department. And why did they do that? Well, like one of their thoughts was this can really help the people in Iran. This can give them a way to actually get access to real information and not just what's being piped into them from, the regime in charge. Look, privacy and security are always two sides of the same coin, right. And there's always a coin flip. There are technical solutions where if you have trusted intermediaries, you don't necessarily have to reveal yourself, but you can still carry entitlements and authorizations to be able to kind of do certain things. But, there are still technical means of revealing privacy in the future. So for instance, you've all heard about store and decrypt later, right? Quantum is going to break all encryption. And so the bad guy is going to record everything now. And once quantum shows up, read the secrets, right? Privacy has a similar sort of problem setup, right? So if you think about Bitcoin, right? Technically, my Bitcoin wallet or ID or address is anonymous. Well, it isn't until it isn't. And once I can actually associate you with a transaction, I can kind of unravel your entire history.
Right. So
look, I'm not going to give you an easy answer to the privacy discussion. I think it's a tricky answer. I think it's super nuanced, and I think part of the solutions to these problems are actually not technical. I think they're societal, right? Like ultimately, there must be a consequence for breaking society's rules. Like you should probably go to jail for certain things. You should probably not be able to come back for a while for certain things. Society has to actually enforce those rules. Every now and then we get into these conversations around how do I prevent my employees from doing this? And how do I prevent my employees from doing that? And it's like, look, we can work on all these problems. You're well past diminishing returns. It's pretty easy for you to have a tamper evident log of everything that's happening. And if someone breaks the rules, you're eventually going to find out. You can eventually figure out all the history. And at some point, you just have to realize that your deterrence against this is this big stick called you're going to go to jail.
So I guess coming back to this idea, I'm always interested in the societal elements, particularly when we have so many people embracing social media and just sharing their lives on social media. And in that realm, I mean, Jasson, you're out there, you're doing podcasts, you're doing interviews. Josh, same thing, you're doing interviews, you're out there. It's part of the job. And so is this making these impersonation attempts easier for the attackers? Is there something that we need to start thinking about, right? As brands, as businesses, right? As we want to reach out to our audiences. So what do we do? Because it seems like we're just giving them more, audio input, more video input of our person so that they could, facilitate an attack more efficiently.
If you've put more than 10 seconds of audio of yourself on anything that's public, you are clonable, right? I don't know what the stats are in video, but it's just be prepared to be astounded that it's a lot less than you think it would be, right? If you've ever written what do the writing say? It doesn't take much of a writing sample either to kind of understand your writing style. This is the horse is out of the barn on this one. What you can do, what your companies can do, what brands need to do at the end of the day is the idea already exists. It's been horribly implemented and executed by the companies that have existed it. But let's talk about the blue check mark. like there is something to the idea, even if the implementation is false. People need to stand behind what they're producing in a way that attributes back to them. That's the only answer that I really can kind of see and understand. Not for all communication, but for managing your brand, for managing your company, for managing your image. If you're a company or a product or a public figure, you need to speak and communicate through attested channels.
Yeah, it's I feel like the ship has kind of sailed in a lot of ways, and everybody's information's already out there. So it's but it just becomes a way of life. I mean, is that really where we're at? I mean, it's now you have to literally question everything in your personal life, in your professional life. It's a lot of work, Jason.
There's probably a policy angle to this as well. I don't think we're currently living through the times that's willing to do that, but there's probably a policy angle of like, what's the big stick here, right? Like while people need to protect themselves, there should be some expectation over time that like reputational damage by a bad actor or an adversary needs to be punishable by a way that is an effective deterrent.
Absolutely. Agreed. And coming back to hospitality, Josh, when we were talking earlier, there's so many different entities involved in the hospitality world. And so managing security and, we talk about supply chain attacks, third-party attacks. I mean, how do you manage through that in the hospitality world, particularly when, if we're talking about impersonation, right? You can have people come in, I'm the CEO, and they're talking to maybe someone who's a little more junior, and they take action because it's time-bound and all these other things. How are you guys managing through that?
Yeah, so we, like as a branded partner, like we work with the major brands, Hilton, Marriott, IHG, Hyatt. And so each brand gives us variable degrees of what we can do on our side versus what we do on the brand side. And so any opportunity we have where we can do everything on our side, we'll take it. Like if we can have that reception, welcome desk, workstations managed by us, we'll do that because we know that we have the most up-to-date data of who works for us and when they start and quit. If you're relying on a brand managed platform, we're relying on that general manager once they've been employed and brought into our domain where we've given them, their Beyond Identity passkey and their email address and everything else on our side. We're relying on, if it's a brand managed desk, then we're relying on that general manager to, submit those forms to create those employees to use the reception desk. And when it comes to the end of it, at the end of the day, if you're a busy GM and you're taking care of everything, you're usually there in charge of, 100 to 120 room hotel. They've got, various departments. They've got housekeeping, they've got food and beverage, they have the sales departments, they have the reception folks, and then they're still trying to make sure their bills get processed for us so we can, keep them operating and all that stuff. The last thing is on your list is probably removing those old people. Just because it takes time. I got to log into the system, got to pull them up, got to remove them, make sure that they're processed. So when we're able to shift that over to our side, we can integrate things much more tightly so that when somebody's hired, within an hour, we've got their account created. And then our goal is hey, the first step of when the employee starts, first thing that they do is they're going to log into Beyond Identity's portal, download that passkey, bind it to that device, and rinse and repeat for any computers that they're going to work on, and then we assign the license from there, and then they can continue to go. And then we know that as soon as they leave, we can tear down that license, revoke that passkey, and we've moved on. Versus the other model of relying on a GM to go into a portal, create the account, make sure they've got access, they've created their password, they've added their MFA tool, whatever it is that the brand requires, because every brand has a different one. And then they go, and then suddenly they leave in a week. Well, I forgot to terminate them. They show up in my hotel for the next 4 months, and we don't want that to be able to. A lot of the brands put limits, every 90 days or whatever to change the password, but it's still an opportunity of a time where that stays open. So that's why we try and do that directly. But then on the flip side, there are smaller organizations where they maybe only own one hotel and maybe they run it themselves, and they don't have the bandwidth to have that. So hopefully, I think there's a trend to engage with MSPs to help them with that.
Yep.
But a lot of them don't see that as a valuable expense because it's still, hey, we never had to pay for this before. Why should we add
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
And the
yeah. No one's gonna
brand,
get us.
yeah,
Yeah. Who would want
exactly.
to target us? Yeah.
Exactly. And then they're like, hey, we're just going to use what the brand provides. And hopefully then that they're a little bit more diligent in keeping up with that. But as we add more and more systems into hospitality, and we're asking people to put passwords into all of this, it just creates another area where it can, another failure point or another breach point. My biggest concern is employees that leave. Hopefully we've got, fairly good folks, but still when you leave, you don't want to leave all those holes open. And with the traditional model is, hey, you sign into, Kipsu for messaging, and this is your username and password. And you sign into the PMS, and here's your username and password. And this is your Windows log and username and password. And I can guarantee you that these employees, again, we're hiring, great, warm, easygoing folks that are like they love taking care of people. They probably are reusing the same password everywhere, so they've
Oh
got these bad
yes.
password
Oh
habits. That's
yeah.
why I've been on a mission to I'm so passionate about removing the password for hospitality folks because it not only does it make their life so much easier. I've had so many comments of
Yeah.
people. We recently opened a hotel and the GM called it automagical. He's like, this is
Yeah.
amazing. On our side, all he had to do was, type in his PIN code and he was logged into everything. Every time he would click like, oh, I need a purchasing platform. And then he'd see that
Right.
beyond identity verification come up and he's in. No passwords, no, he's
That's
able to
fantastic.
do all of our systems. And then he's like, hey, can you put this on my brand account too, so I can just log in with that? And like, sorry, that separate separate
Yeah.
entity, separate controller.
Right.
You're going to have to use Duo for your push, and you'll have to use them Microsoft Authenticator, and you'll have to have your password. And yes, you have to change it every 90 days because that's their rules. Um, and so we love the fact that
Yeah.
at least on our side, we're doing whatever we can to control that. And I'm hopeful that we'll get the brands to kind of take notice and realize the fatigue that comes with the password and using an MFA device.
It agreed. I'm not gonna lie, Josh. For the longest time, I was avoiding the whole two-factor authentication because it just drives me insane. Because I never have like the right device, that it bounces to, and it's always a thing. But I'm also kind of curious on hospitality in general. There's a fairly high turnover rate for these kind of employees, and in this world like restaurants, hotels, etc. So how do you manage training? So kind of security awareness and training when you have such high turnover. To your point, like someone leaves within a week. If you have a lot of that happening, how can you manage security in that way and
Yeah.
training in that way?
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and tell you that it was just easy. We just flipped a switch and turned Beyond Identity on, and that was that. No, it is a
Right,
little bit. It's a heavy lift right now for us to
right.
get people like when they start, get them enrolled, and get that passkey on board. We've got some hotel leadership, general managers, AGMs, which are really great at it, and we have other ones who are like seem to forget it exists as a thing to do. And so we're always looking at the reports and beyond, like what pending enrollments are there, and like, hey, why are these folks still pending? They've been here for a while. We need to work with that. So that's actually one thing we're focusing on this year is to make that process a little bit more streamlined. And I know Beyond
Yeah.
Identity is making some hopefully platform enhancements and things that they've been working on in their pipeline to make that easier so that users can maybe authenticate to one device and then like they have a YubiKey available. We don't use YubiKeys just because it's hard enough for them to keep their name badge. I would having them carry around a YubiKey, I think would be an impossible ask. But I think the idea of like, if you've got your passkey bound to your mobile device and you can use a QR code and scan and authenticate, that would be like the wave of the future. But right now we're still working on that aspect of like, hey, how does that flow work to get them in? Because it is a little bit of a lift. But then once they're in, as far as the training we do for security, we use another company. It's called Venza, but they actually help us with all of that PCI training and cybersecurity awareness, phishing, spear phishing, all of those types of things, and they're constantly enhancing that. But it is something that you're right. We have some people that start like they get onboarded to all this stuff. They can literally just click there and do the training. But and again, it's some leaders are really great at making sure like, hey, you don't do anything until you've gone through this training. And then we have other people who are like, hey, I really I'm swamped. I've got,
Yep.
so many people coming on. I need to do, you're going to, trenches in the ground here. Let's get going. And then they're catching that up. So that's the other one of the other things that Beyond Identity has done for us with that single sign-on is it has taken the barrier away of getting to your training or getting to those jobs. Because once your account's created and you've got that passkey, it's just one click in. There is no what's my username, what's my password, what's any of that, which, that's bound together with single sign-on and SAML with an identity provider. But still that the password is the barrier.
So Josh, what's the actual user experience, right? Like you started this with like the warning of that phishing attack was the user got queried for a password and they shouldn't need a password at all, right? So how's the typical person in this scenario logging in the passwordless case?
So we have it connected with our Windows domain or our Active Directory domain. So when folks are originally signing in, they do have a password at their very first day. Like, hey, we have a generic format of how we make it based on different artifacts from their employee file. And that's their initial password. And then when they log in, they're going to create one. And then as soon as they log in, they would go to Microsoft, the Beyond Identity portal, like Microsoft My Apps, and they click Beyond Identity, downloads their passkey, binds it to their device, and then once that's done, now that device is all set up for them. So now when they log in, instead of using that password, they're going to use a PIN, or maybe if they've enrolled their fingerprint, if they have like they're a support office user and has a fingerprint reader on their device that they've enrolled. And they log in and then they open up their email, type in their email address, click next, and instead of going to that Microsoft flow, it goes right to Beyond Identity, verifies that, and then they're in. That's literally why the GM, I think, calls it automagical, because there was no all these forms to fill out when you first start. It's literally what's your username, and then it's checking that device right away. And so the flow, once they have it set up, it's so easy. I feel the other thing that happened, like our CEO last, maybe it was when the new iPhone came out, they didn't transfer their passkey to their new phone. And so then he's trying to log in. He's like, I can't log into anything. Everything's giving me like, what's going on? I'm like, hey, did you move your passkey over? Well, yeah, I backed up. I'm like, well, it's like it's like your Apple Pay card. You gotta move everything over. So then we put that passkey back on, and all of a sudden, no more problems. He said, but the idea that, hey, these people haven't typed a password in 4 years, to actually bring back passwords on our side, I think people might actually cry, or at least be like really shaken to the core of like, this is not easy. We had a hotel that had left us, and then they came back. Like we managed for other owners as well. So we were managing this hotel when we originally had the Beyond Identity rollout. They left. They went to another management company. And then this year they came back to us, and one of the first things the GM said was like, "Oh, I can't wait to get all that integration so we don't have to type in all this stuff." And so I think that's a little bit of a win too. People prefer it once they experience it. Yes. I think, but I think they have a little bit of a hesitation for new folks that come in and they find out we use a passkey, because that word has become a little bit dirty because of this really poor deployment by the masses. But I don't know how we get around that. Like Facebook wants you to use a passkey, Google wants you to use a passkey, whatever those might be, and they like don't understand how it works, or they don't use a password manager, and they don't quite get the fact of like, well, what's the point of this passkey if I can just use my password? And that's a good point. Like, what is the point of the passkey if you can just use your password? But at the same time, people, I don't think, have a full understanding of, I think passkey's a really generic, broad term rather than a very specific thing. And so the way that I get into the technical weeds and don't really know what I'm talking about, and I'll defer to Jason here, but I understand it's like a key pair certificate rather than this magical passkey you got in the Nintendo game that you just tap on whatever device you want to get into.
So what is the evolution of, let's say identity-based security look like, Jason? I'm quite curious. I love the show Altered Carbon, and they use actual DNA kind of thing. But I'm curious, kind of what does this look like? Where are we going to? Because ostensibly everything can be spoofed, right? Be it your voice, be it your fingerprint, or other things. But what does the future hold here?
Interesting. Let's try and find an analogy that's in the style of altered carbon in a sleeve, or maybe even permutation city and Greggy. And I mean, let's see. Identity is basically what you are, right? And I don't know. It sounds a little philosophical, but it's also meaningful. So a program, before you load that program, has a very specific sequence of bytes.
Mm-hmm.
No other program has that sequence of bytes except for a copy of that program, right? That program's identity is literally its sequence of bytes.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about essentially how we're talking about what modern identity is, that is the concept. It's like your identity is this unique pointer
Mm-hmm.
that's cryptographically sealed. So when we say cryptographically sealed, what we really mean is it's signed in a way where the only person who could produce a signature over that unique signature, that unique sequence of bytes, is someone who possesses that private key.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, why can't I steal the private key? Well, in the modern world, so like go try and buy a processor. It doesn't matter if you're buying like a Intel CPU or if you're buying like a tiny little ARM processor, right? They all have these things on them now called secure enclaves, which is essentially a place that will create those key pairs, keep them separated from the main processor and main memory. The key's never in memory, can't be stealed. There's no instruction that you could ever issue that says read key, right? Basically, you could think of it like imagine there's a jail and the jail doesn't have a door, but you can reach between the bars. And there's a monkey with a pen on the inside. And essentially what you're doing is you're handing a document through those bars and asking the monkey with the pen to sign it. Like that's kind of what an enclave is.
Okay.
And so the future of identity, and this is ultimately what is kind of at the core of passkeys and device. And anytime you hear someone say device bound, it's picture the monkey in the jail without a door, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime you hear someone say device bound, that means your computer, regardless of what it is, has that little isolated jail and it's able to sign things. And because it's built in that way, you know anytime you see that signature, it's that thing and nothing else. Mm-hmm. You can build on that. Right. And so when you probably have an Apple phone or an Android phone, and I'm sure you've used it to pay for something, right? Like a mobile payment. The experience you see is you tap and you smile, or your mask breaks the smile detector, right? And so you put a little PIN code in. You don't really think of it beyond just I bought some coffee. But what happened under the hood is you just did single device multi-factor authentication that leveraged a device bound credential. Right? Mm-hmm. The merchant sent your phone a bill over the wireless network, and your phone said, "Hey, monkey, sign this." Right? And turns out for the key that you just asked the monkey to use, it pulled up its book and it says, "Hey, the manual says to use this key. You need to do 3 jumping jacks right now, otherwise I won't sign this for you." Right? But instead of 3 jumping jacks, it's like, "Hey, I need you to smile." And so you send a biometric or an image of your biometric into the enclave, and if the monkey likes it, it signs it. And if it doesn't, it says try again or give me an alternative. Right? And you give it a pen, and so that's called enclave policy. When you satisfy the enclave policy, it will then sign the document and give the document back to you. Key never moves. Key's never in memory. Key can't be stolen, and you now get a receipt of 2 interesting things. Either a inherence factor, right, the biometric, or a knowledge factor, that local PIN. And because that key can't move, you have a possession factor of the device itself. So that's what makes it multi-factor. That's what makes it device bound. That's what makes it incredibly secure. And oh, by the way, any event that you produce off of that authentication now is really special and unique in your SIM or in your XDR. It's an event that you know with certainty came from a specific device. It's an event that's not spoofable. It actually can't be faked. Under the assumption that the foundry that produced that chip has not been essentially compromised by the Russians or the Chinese. So it is possible to actually prevent impersonation. Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody in the long tail of who's listening to this show is going to say, "Oh, what about quantum?" Well, the answer is pretty simple to that too. There's post-quantum signature algorithms, and these systems use those as well. So haha, you're right, flip the switch.
Yeah.
Post-quantum signature, defeated.
Yeah.
That's what the future looks like. That's like the building blocks at the lowest layer.
Mhm.
I think what the future looks like for users, though, is that Apple Pay experience, but for work.
Interesting. Interesting. So for those out there, and I think about business leaders and others, so how do they get started on this path, right? A really kind of next generation, right? I identity based or device based security, if they're not there yet. I mean, where do you even get started in a 30, 60, 90-day plan?
Yeah.
Because this is very compelling. And I suspect a lot of people want to figure out a path forward to help themselves be more secure.
So the easy answer is just call us. But let me talk a little bit about the architecture. So like a good identity security platform, it doesn't displace your identity stack, it plugs into your identity stack, right? And so we follow that tenet. It actually doesn't take but a day to plug us into an Intra or an Okta or a Ping or a One Login or a Shibboleth or pick your IDP provider. The harder part, as we kind of talked through earlier, is the enrollment. Like, how do you actually want to enroll? And best practices that we see is, you pick your rings. Your rings are kind of based on who are the riskiest users, and that's very dependent on your business, right? So if you're hospitality, you may define risk in a very different way than if you're software tech, than if you are education, right? But we do see that pattern show up. They call them rings, right? So ring 1, ring 2, ring 3. We have a couple different deployment models, but I would imagine that like over time, any solution is going to evolve with these similar deployment models. But you can deploy with an MDM to manage devices. You can enable self-service for BYOD or third party. The hardest part in all of this is really just getting your users ready and aware for the new experience. Otherwise, you're going to get help desk calls of like, hey, I don't see my password box anywhere, and so now I don't know how to log in. And you're like, well, no, just click the button. And they're like, but no, I don't see a password box, right? So like, there's a little bit of a marketing exercise, even though it's to your internal workforce. But we've had companies deploy 60,000 people in 60 days. So it's possible to go quick. Usually the really quick organizations are they're motivated, right? Like they had a breach or they had an incident, and this is a very easy, quick response to ensure that the incident doesn't persist or continue. But it's also we also find deployment timeframe is largely a cultural decision of the organization that's running the deployment, right? Some organizations, like IT deployments, it doesn't matter what it is, it's going to take a period of time because that's how the organization has decided it's going to take.
Right. Wow. And I'm cognizant of time, but I do want to ask kind of one final personal question, Jasson. We've had a lot of entrepreneurs and founders come on the podcast over the years, and I came across an interview you did, and you talked about 19 years old was your first startup writing software, and then you found a book. There was this book that you were reading from Michael Lewis. I think it was New Thing, about Jim Clark and having that unequivocal obsession of solving problems. And I just would love if you could share a little advice for our listeners who are, kind of thinking about pursuing this path, and how do you get started, and just take that first step.
Yeah. Let's see. It's a hard thing to give advice to because it's kind of saying like fall in love with X, right?
Right.
And ultimately, like that's an intrinsic motivation. It's not really an extrinsic motivation. But the people that I see do this and follow similar paths, like you're highly curious, you really understand a thing. You're not necessarily superficial on the topic. You obsess over the problem. The monetary reward isn't necessarily like really what's on your mind. Mm-hmm. The fact that the problem must be solved and other people are going to solve it incorrectly is what's on your mind. Right. Like it's almost like an on the spectrum obsession. That's kind of what you need to be the North Star, to keep everybody motivated to get through the hard times, but also like if it were easy, the existing players would be doing it, right? if it were easy, the opportunity wouldn't be yours. If it were accomplishable in 9 to 5, it wouldn't be your opportunity to
Right.
try,
Right.
right? So like, it is hard work. It does require a lot of persistence. The people that I see that do the best, they're naturally curious, they're systems thinkers, they go deep, they don't accept superficial responses to answers. They keep asking why, they really want to understand how stuff works. They're system thinkers, you know? For me, you know, it was a combination of, I liked puzzles, I like building things.
Yep.
I like the idea of turning an idea into something that somebody else used, right? Like how else, it's like one of the most obvious ways to impact others is to build a thing they use, right? That changes their life. And you know, you don't have to change, we're not talking about like a movie, you have to change their life to where somebody writes about it, but like changes the way they behave for the better. Like that's meaningful, right? It means you kind of impacted society. And you know, the way you do it is technical, but at the end of the day, you're still doing a thing to try and impact the behavior, right? Like beyond identity, like our mission is really an obsession around 70 to 80% of all security incidents are preventable. Like for the sake of, for the love of God, can we move on to the next problem that is actually hard? These 70 to 80% problems, we can prevent them. We don't have to reduce them. We can actually prevent them. I don't know. I could go on a long time for that, but like if somebody were getting started, like don't say you want to do a startup, but you don't know what you want to do a startup on. That sounds like you should join a startup, right? Like if you're going to start a thing, you already know what that thing is, right? There's a bit of a self-selection bias in that. I can totally see you want to do a startup, you don't know what to do, and you're inexperienced, so you just don't really recognize the situation. And the answer is join a startup that you can get excited by. You're going to grow really fast. You're going to give and be responsibility that you don't deserve. You're going to be given an opportunity in a noose to kind of grow or hang yourself with that you will not experience it anywhere else. Yeah. And that's where learning comes from. That's where you get to meet great people like Josh. That's where you get to discover. Like, you know, you only ever have a vague idea about like the specific problems, and maybe you understand the macro problems well, but like once you engage with the customer, then like they really tell you, well, yeah, you're on target enough for me to work with you, but really I need this. I need this change. I need this shift. I need
real world problems. And similar kind of question, Josh, we're always interested in how people found their way into security. It's not always a linear path. Some people, you know, were, you know, PhD in, you know, linguistics or something like that, and CISO. But yeah, I'm curious kind of how, you know, how did you find your way to this world?
Well, so I actually started school when I went to university. It was for commercial aviation. I'm a pilot. I went to UND Aerospace, and my part-time job was working at a Holiday Inn. And I wanted to be a porter, like the shuttle driver, because I needed the tips in order to pay for rent and everything else. And I stayed with the hotels all the way through college. I did an internship with American Airlines down in DFW. And they, you know, the hotel kept me on as an employee during that semester. And when I came back, finished up school, unfortunately, September 11th happened my freshman year. And so that kind of impacted things. By the time I was ready to go and, you know, had things lined up, a lot of that was backfilled with a lot of furloughed pilots. And so I thought I'd go into aviation investigation. I really liked human factors and, you know, cause and effect, how things happened. But those jobs weren't available anymore. So I thought, well, the company I worked for said, hey, how would you like to go be a general manager of a hotel in Fort Worth, Texas? And I said, probably not. But a week later, I was had my car packed and was driving down to Texas. And I ended up I'm like, I'll do this for a few months and get back into aviation. But, you know, I kind of fell in love with hospitality. I was in the operations side for a long time until about 2013, and then kind of moved into the property support. And I really saw the evolution of technology and how we use it in our operation. When I first started, really it was the CRS, the Central Reservation System, and the property management system. And people had a Windows login to use Word, but that was about all the technology we had. And now, you know, we run on so many systems and so many things. So it's been fun to be a part of that evolution and see how that happens. And then I just kind of got a knack for the IT side and kind of shifted into that full time here about 8 years ago. And so that's kind of been, that's how I ended up where I am now. But I still am very passionate about hospitality and taking care of guests. And I would love to see how we can continue to equip our teams in a secure way so that free up just to deliver hospitality and not so scared about phishing emails and attacks and did I expose or have a big breach or anything like that.
Wonderful. Pilot, that sounds scary. Well, thank you, Josh, Jasson, for this wonderful conversation today and incredibly insightful. And I wish we could keep talking, but I know you have things to do today. So to all of our listeners out there, again, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to give John the drum roll for...
Smash that subscribe button.
And you get a fresh episode every single Tuesday. So until next time, everybody, stay secure.